I never thought a pile of seasoned oak would turn into a war that would consume our entire neighborhood in Kenton, Ohio. But the moment Barbara Patterson knocked on my door that frigid November morning, I knew my life was about to get complicated. My name is Jacob Zimmerman, and I had just finished stacking another cord of wood next to my outdoor furnace when I heard the sharp, insistent knocking. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and opened the door to find Barbara standing there with her arms crossed, her face pinched like she had just bitten into a lemon. She was the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, a title she wielded like a weapon against anyone who dared to step out of line in our otherwise quiet subdivision. "Good morning, Barbara," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" "Mr. Zimmerman, we need to talk about that monstrosity you installed in your backyard," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her pearl necklace caught the weak November sunlight. I glanced back at my outdoor wood furnace, a beautiful central boiler unit I had installed last spring. It sat about 60 feet from my house, connected by underground pipes that fed hot water into my home heating system. The thing was a marvel of efficiency, and it had already saved me hundreds of dollars compared to my old propane system. My furnace? It's completely legal, Barbara. I checked all the county regulations before I installed it. Legal with the county, perhaps, but not with the HOA, she said, thrusting a manila folder toward me. Section 12, subsection 4 of our covenant, conditions, and restrictions clearly states that no homeowner shall create a nuisance that negatively impacts the quality of life for neighboring residents. Your smoke is a nuisance. I took the folder but did not open it. The smoke? Barbara, this thing barely produces any smoke. Modern outdoor furnaces are designed to burn clean. I only see a little smoke when I first load it in the morning. Mrs. Henderson across the street says the smoke bothers her allergies. Mr. and Mrs. Chen next door claim it smells like a campfire all day long, and I personally find it aesthetically unpleasing to see that industrial-looking thing from my bedroom window. I felt my jaw tighten. Mrs. Henderson was Barbara's best friend and would complain about anything Barbara told her to complain about. The Chens had never said a word to me directly, and as for Barbara seeing my furnace from her bedroom window, she lived 4 houses down and would need binoculars to even spot it. "I am not removing my furnace," I said flatly. "I have every right to heat my home the way I see fit, and I followed all the proper procedures." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "You have 14 days to remove it, or we will begin fining you $100 per day until you comply. The HOA board voted unanimously last night." "Unanimously? Who else is on this board besides you and your friends?" "The composition of the board is none of your concern. What should concern you is compliance. Good day, Mr. Zimmerman." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, leaving me standing there with the folder in my hand and anger building in my chest. I went back inside and actually read through the documents. The section she cited was vague enough that it could mean almost anything, which was probably intentional. The HOA had been around since the subdivision was built in 2003, and I had bought my house here in 2019. In all that time, I had never had a single issue with them beyond the standard annual dues. I called my neighbor Tom, who lived 2 houses down and had always been friendly. "Tom, did you know about this HOA meeting last night?" I asked when he picked up. What meeting? I didn't get any notice about a meeting. Apparently they voted to ban my outdoor furnace. Barbara just showed up at my door with an ultimatum." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Jacob, I hate to say it, but Barbara has been on a tear lately. She got the Johnsons fined last month for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. She made the Rodriguez family remove their vegetable garden because she said it looked unkempt. I think she is just bored and needs something to control." "Well, she picked the wrong person this time," I said. "I'm not backing down." "Be careful, man. She has deep pockets and a lot of time on her hands. Her husband is some big-shot lawyer in Columbus." I thanked Tom and hung up, then spent the next several hours researching Ohio HOA law. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. While HOAs had broad authority to enforce their covenants, they also had to follow proper procedures, including giving adequate notice of meetings and allowing homeowners to contest decisions. If Barbara had held a secret meeting without notifying the community, That was a violation of the Ohio Revised Code Section 5312. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board citing the legal requirements they had violated and demanding they rescind their decision. I also made it clear that I would seek legal counsel if they proceeded with fines. I sent it certified mail the next day. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, I received a thick envelope containing a formal notice of violation, a schedule of fines, and a letter from Richard Patterson, Barbara's husband, writing on his law firm letterhead. The letter was professionally worded, but carried an unmistakable threat: comply or face legal action for violating the HOA covenant. He also noted that my complaint about meeting procedures was moot because the board had held an emergency session, which did not require advance notice to homeowners under their bylaws. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter 3 times. The furnace hummed quietly in the background, pumping warmth through my baseboard radiators. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 28 degrees, and snow was forecast for the weekend. The idea of ripping out my heating system in the middle of winter was absurd. I needed a lawyer of my own. After several phone calls, I found an attorney in nearby Findlay who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Marcus Donovan, and he had a reputation for being aggressive and thorough. When I met with him in his office the following Monday, he listened to my story while taking detailed notes. "The problem you face is that HOAs have enormous latitude in Ohio," Marcus explained. "Unless you can prove they are acting in bad faith or discriminating against you specifically, courts generally defer to the HOA's authority to enforce their covenants. But the covenant section they are citing is completely vague. It could mean anything." "Exactly, and that cuts both ways. They can interpret it broadly, but so can we." "Tell me something. Have they enforced this provision against anyone else for anything similar?" I thought about it. "Not that I know of. Several people have fire pits. A few have smokers for barbecue. No one has said anything about those." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That is selective enforcement. If they are targeting you specifically while allowing similar activities from others, that strengthens your case. But litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Are you prepared for that?" I looked out his office window at the gray November sky. "I do not want to fight just to fight. I want to heat my home affordably and legally. But if they force my hand, yes, I will fight." "Good. Let me send them a letter outlining your position and see if we can negotiate a settlement. Sometimes these things resolve once they realize the homeowner is serious." Marcus drafted a comprehensive response, pointing out the selective enforcement issue, questioning the validity of their emergency meeting, and noting that my furnace met all county and state regulations. He sent it off with copies of the relevant codes and a polite but firm suggestion that the HOA reconsider its position. Meanwhile, December arrived with a vengeance. The first major snowstorm of the season dumped 14 inches on Kenton, and temperatures plummeted into the single digits. My wood furnace kept my house toasty warm while I watched my neighbors' propane and natural gas meters spin like crazy. I was burning through about a cord of wood every 2 weeks, which cost me practically nothing since I had access to free wood from a friend who owned timberland. Then the energy crisis hit. It started with news reports about natural gas shortages due to increased demand and supply chain issues. Prices began creeping up in early December, but by the time Christmas arrived, they had skyrocketed. What had been a manageable expense for most homeowners suddenly became crushing. People in our subdivision who had been paying $200 a month for heat were now looking at bills exceeding $600. Propane users had it even worse, with prices tripling seemingly overnight. I heard the complaints at the neighborhood holiday party, which was held at the community clubhouse despite the tension between Barbara and me. Tom pulled me aside while we stood near the punch bowl. "You're looking smarter every day," he said quietly. "My gas bill last month was $700, $700, and it's only going to get worse." "Have you thought about alternative heating?" I asked. "Like what?" "Installing a system like yours would cost thousands, and even if I wanted to, Barbara would probably ban it, just like she is trying to ban yours." He was right, of course. Several other neighbors approached me throughout the evening, asking about my furnace, how much it cost to install, where I got my wood, how much I was saving. I answered their questions honestly, watching Barbara glare at me from across the room. She was wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and she held court with Mrs. Henderson and a few other loyalists. Just before the party ended, Barbara stepped to the front of the room and tapped a spoon against her wine glass. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she said, her voice saccharine sweet. "As we head into the new year, I want to remind everyone that maintaining the standards of Meadowbrook Heights is everyone's responsibility. That means following our community guidelines and respecting your neighbors. Some people seem to think the rules do not apply to them, but I assure you the board is committed to enforcement." She looked directly at me when she said that last part. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. I met her gaze and did not look away. The fine started on January 2nd. I received a letter stating that I owed $100 per day, retroactive to the end of the 14-day compliance period. According to their math, I now owed nearly $5,000, with the total increasing daily. I forwarded everything to Marcus, who filed a lawsuit in Hardin County Common Pleas Court, seeking a declaratory judgment that the HOA's actions were invalid. We also requested an injunction preventing them from collecting fines while the case was pending. The judge granted a temporary restraining order, which bought us time but also escalated the conflict. Barbara responded by ramping up her campaign against me. She sent letters to every homeowner in the subdivision, painting me as a scofflaw who was polluting the air and destroying property values. She included carefully selected photos of my furnace on days when I had just loaded it, and there was visible smoke, making it look far worse than it actually was. The neighborhood began to split into factions. Some people supported me, recognizing that I was within my rights and that the HOA was overreaching. Others sided with Barbara, either because they genuinely believed I was creating a nuisance or because they were afraid of becoming her next target. A few people just wanted the whole thing to go away and resented both of us for creating drama. Then, the gas prices hit a new peak in February. The national news was full of stories about families choosing between heating their homes and buying groceries. In Ohio, where winter temperatures regularly dropped below zero, it was a genuine crisis. Our subdivision was no exception. I started seeing people wearing heavy coats inside their houses, keeping their thermostats set to 60 degrees to save money. Elderly residents were particularly hard hit. That is when things got interesting. Tom showed up at my door on a Saturday morning in mid-February looking sheepish. "Jacob, I need to ask you something, and feel free to say no," he began. "What is up? Is there any way I could buy firewood from you? My gas bill last month was $900. I cannot keep this up. I have a fireplace, and I figure if I can heat at least part of my house with wood, it might help." I thought about it. "I can do better than that. I will give you a cord of wood. No charge. I have plenty." His eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. Come by this afternoon and we will load up your truck." Word spread quickly. Within a week, I had 4 other neighbors asking for wood. I gave it freely, happy to help and also aware that every person I helped was another potential ally against Barbara's crusade. It was not entirely altruistic, but it was not cynical either. People were struggling, and I had resources to share. Barbara noticed, of course. She sent me a cease and desist letter claiming that I was running a commercial firewood operation in violation of the HOA covenant against home businesses. Never mind that I was not charging anyone anything. Marcus responded with a letter politely telling her to pound sand, in legal terms. The court case moved slowly, as these things do. We had a preliminary hearing in March where both sides presented their arguments. The judge, an older man named Timothy Walsh, seemed skeptical of the HOA's position but was not ready to rule. He ordered mediation, which was scheduled for late April. Meanwhile, spring arrived, and with it came a slight reprieve in heating costs. The gas prices remained high, but at least people were not running their furnaces constantly. My wood furnace sat idle most days, ready for next winter. The mediation was a disaster. Barbara and 2 other board members showed up along with Richard Patterson. Marcus and I represented my side. The mediator, a patient woman named Carol, tried to find common ground, but Barbara refused to budge. "Mr. Zimmerman needs to remove that furnace," Barbara insisted. "It is an eyesore and a health hazard." It is neither, I countered. I have documentation from the EPA showing that modern outdoor furnaces produce less particulate matter than most fireplaces. And as for aesthetics, it is in my backyard, surrounded by trees, barely visible from any neighbor's property. That is not true. I can see it clearly from my window. You live 4 houses away, Barbara, unless you are using a telescope. I call nonsense on that. The mediator intervened before things got heated. Let us focus on solutions. Mr. Zimmerman, would you be willing to install some kind of screening to make the furnace less visible? I already have trees around it, but sure, I could add some privacy fencing if that would resolve this. Barbara shook her head. That's not acceptable. The furnace itself is the problem. The smoke, the smell, the whole thing. It has to go. Richard Patterson leaned forward. Our position is that the HOA has the authority to regulate this type of installation, and we are exercising that authority. If Mr. Zimmerman disagrees, the courts can decide. That is exactly what we're doing, Marcus said calmly, and I feel confident about our chances. The mediation ended with no resolution. Judge Walsh scheduled a full hearing for June. As summer approached, something unexpected happened. The national energy situation worsened. A major pipeline rupture in the Gulf Coast disrupted natural gas supplies across the Midwest. Prices, which had started to normalize in late spring, shot up again. Analysts were predicting that the coming winter would be even worse than the last one. People in Meadowbrook Heights began to panic. I heard conversations at the grocery store, at church, at the local diner. Everyone was worried about how they would afford to heat their homes. And increasingly, people were looking at outdoor wood furnaces as a solution. In late May, something remarkable happened. A petition began circulating in the subdivision, signed by 37 homeowners, asking the HOA board to reverse its ban on outdoor furnaces and allow residents to install them as an alternative heating source. The petition noted that with proper regulations regarding placement and emission standards, outdoor furnaces could provide affordable heat without creating legitimate nuisances. Barbara was furious. She sent out an email to all residents, calling the petition misguided and insisting that allowing outdoor furnaces would turn Meadowbrook Heights into a smoky industrial wasteland. She scheduled an open HOA meeting for early June to discuss the matter. I attended that meeting along with probably 100 other residents, which was unprecedented. Our subdivision only had about 70 homes, so clearly some people brought family members or friends. The community clubhouse was packed, standing room only. Barbara called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a prepared speech about maintaining property values and quality of life. She showed a slideshow with photos of industrial-looking outdoor furnaces, none of which resembled my modern unit. She cited dubious studies about health risks from wood smoke, ignoring the more credible research showing modern furnaces were clean burning. When she finally opened the floor for comments, the floodgates opened. Tom stood up first. Barbara, with all due respect, I think you are out of touch with what people in this community are facing. My heating bills last winter were astronomical. I cannot afford another season like that. If an outdoor furnace can help, why should the HOA prevent it? Mrs. Henderson stood to defend Barbara. Because some of us value our health and our property values more than saving a few dollars on heating. A few dollars? Someone shouted from the back. Try a few $1,000s. The room erupted in crosstalk. Barbara banged her gavel, trying to restore order. Judge Walsh's hearing was scheduled for 2 days later, and I could tell Barbara was trying to shore up support before that. An elderly man named Frank Morrison, who lived at the end of my street, stood up. He had to be in his 70s, a widower who lived on a fixed income. I want to say something, Frank said, his voice shaking slightly. Last winter, I kept my thermostat at 58 degrees because I could not afford my gas bills. I wore my winter coat inside my own house. I got sick twice because I was so cold. Jacob gave me firewood for free, and I was able to use my fireplace to stay warm. He did not have to do that, but he did. Now you want to punish him and prevent other people from finding affordable ways to heat their homes? That is wrong, and you all know it. The room went silent. Barbara looked uncomfortable for the first time. Mr. Morrison, no one is saying you should freeze, she said, her tone softer than before. But there are other solutions besides outdoor furnaces. Like what? Solar panels I cannot afford? Geothermal systems that cost $30,000 to install? Those are not realistic options for most of us. Another woman stood up. I signed the petition because I want the option to install an outdoor furnace if I choose to. I am not saying everyone should have one, but banning them completely is unreasonable, especially given the current energy situation. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes, getting increasingly contentious. Barbara finally adjourned without any resolution, saying the board would take the comments under advisement. But I could see the writing on the wall. She was losing support, and she knew it. The court hearing 2 days later was more formal, but covered similar ground. Marcus presented our case methodically, arguing that the HOA had selectively enforced vague covenant language, failed to follow proper procedures, and was infringing on my property rights without legitimate justification. He brought in an expert witness, an environmental engineer, who testified about the efficiency and low emissions of modern outdoor furnaces like mine. The HOA's attorney, a slick guy from Richard Patterson's firm named Derek Lansing, argued that HOAs existed precisely to make these kinds of decisions, and the courts should not second-guess them. He tried to paint me as a troublemaker who was defying legitimate community standards. Judge Walsh listened carefully, asked pointed questions of both sides, and then took the matter under advisement. He said he would issue a written ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days felt like an eternity. June turned to July, and summer heat replaced winter cold. My furnace sat idle, but I kept it maintained and ready. I also spent time cutting and splitting wood for the coming winter, determined to be prepared regardless of the court's decision. On July 14th, the ruling came. Judge Walsh sided with me on every major point. He found that the HOA had indeed selectively enforced its covenant provisions, that the emergency meeting procedure had been abused, and that banning outdoor furnaces entirely was an unreasonable restraint on property rights. He issued an injunction preventing the HOA from enforcing the ban against me or anyone else, and he invalidated all the fines they had attempted to levy. Marcus called me as soon as he received the ruling. "Jacob, we won. Complete victory. Congratulations." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you, Marcus. I could not have done this without you." "You earned it. You stood your ground when a lot of people would have caved. The judge's ruling is going to set a precedent for other HOA cases in Ohio." I celebrated that night with a beer on my back deck, looking at my faithful wood furnace and feeling vindicated. But I also knew Barbara was not going to take this well. I was right. Within days, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Barbara was calling for a special election to recall the judge's decision through some kind of covenant amendment. But that would require a vote of the entire HOA membership, and given the mood in the subdivision, I did not think she had the votes. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. In early August, the national energy situation deteriorated further. A major natural gas storage facility in Michigan suffered a catastrophic failure, taking millions of cubic feet of storage capacity offline just as utilities were trying to build reserves for winter. Gas futures prices went through the roof, and analysts were predicting that winter heating costs could quadruple compared to normal years. The news sent shockwaves through communities across the Midwest. In Meadowbrook Heights, the petition for allowing outdoor furnaces turned into a stampede. More than 50 homeowners contacted me asking for advice on which units to buy, where to source firewood, and how to install them properly. Barbara tried to organize opposition, but she was fighting a losing battle against economic reality. People were genuinely frightened about being able to afford heat, and no amount of concern about aesthetics or smoke was going to trump that fear. In late August, the HOA held another meeting to vote on a formal amendment to the covenants that would explicitly allow outdoor wood furnaces, subject to reasonable regulations regarding placement, setback distances, and emission standards. Barbara opposed it bitterly, but the vote was not even close. The amendment passed with more than 70% approval. Barbara resigned as HOA president the next day. I would like to say I felt triumphant, but mostly I just felt tired. The whole ordeal had consumed nearly a year of my life and cost me thousands in legal fees, even though I won. Barbara's obsession with control had hurt the entire community, creating division and conflict where none had existed before. September brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn. Contractors were busy throughout the subdivision installing outdoor furnaces. I helped several neighbors with advice and even assisted with a few installations. It felt good to turn something negative into something positive. Then October arrived, and with it came a shocking development. I was reading the Kenton Times one morning when I saw a headline that made me choke on my coffee. Local HOA president faces fraud charges. The article detailed allegations that Barbara Patterson had embezzled more than $60,000 from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA over a 3-year period. According to the investigation by the Ohio Attorney General's office, she'd created fake invoices for landscaping and maintenance work that was never performed, routing the payments to a shell company she controlled. She had also paid herself excessive fees for administrative work without board approval. The investigation had apparently started months earlier when a former board member became suspicious and contacted authorities. The timing of Barbara's resignation suddenly made sense. She was not leaving because of the vote, she was leaving before the indictment came down. The neighborhood was in shock. People who had supported Barbara felt betrayed. Those of us who had opposed her felt vindicated but also disturbed that she had been stealing from all of us the entire time. The legal process moved forward. Barbara was arrested in late October and charged with theft in office and fraud. Richard Patterson filed for divorce 2 weeks later, which surprised no one. The guy was protecting his assets and his reputation. Meanwhile, winter approached, and the predicted energy crisis materialized exactly as forecasted. Natural gas prices hit record highs in November, and they kept climbing. People in Meadowbrook Heights who had installed outdoor furnaces congratulated themselves on their foresight. Those who had not were scrambling for alternatives. My heating bills for the winter were minimal. I spent about $800 on a few cords of supplemental wood beyond what I cut myself, plus some electricity to run the furnace blower and circulating pumps. My neighbors who relied on natural gas were paying $300 to $500 per month, and that was with their thermostats set to 65 degrees. Some people in town were paying even more. The outdoor furnace owners in our subdivision formed an informal cooperative, sharing wood sources, equipment, and labor. It became a real community-building activity, which was ironic given that Barbara had claimed my furnace would destroy the neighborhood's sense of community. Barbara's trial was scheduled for March, but ended up being delayed until May due to various legal maneuvering. When it finally happened, I attended along with several other homeowners. We wanted to see justice done. The prosecution laid out a damning case. Barbara had systematically looted the HOA treasury, using the money to fund her lifestyle while pretending to be a champion of the community. The fake invoices were amateurish in retrospect, but no one had questioned them because Barbara controlled all the records and discouraged oversight. Her defense attorney tried to argue that the charges were overblown, that there were accounting errors but no criminal intent. The jury did not buy it. After 3 days of testimony and less than 4 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Barbara to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution plus penalties. It was a stunning fall from grace for someone who had once ruled our HOA like a petty dictator. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, anger at all the damage Barbara had caused, sadness that it had come to this, and gratitude that I had stood my ground when she tried to bully me into removing my furnace. The HOA elected new leadership, people who were focused on actual community improvement rather than power trips. They implemented new financial controls and transparency measures to prevent future fraud. They also formalized the outdoor furnace regulations, creating a sensible framework that balanced property rights with legitimate neighbor concerns. As for me, I continued heating my home with wood. The energy crisis gradually eased over the following years, but gas prices never returned to their pre-crisis levels. My decision to install the outdoor furnace, which had seemed controversial at the time, proved to be one of the smartest financial moves I ever made. I also learned some valuable lessons about standing up to bullies, about the importance of knowing your rights, and about how communities can come together in the face of adversity. Barbara had tried to use the HOA as a weapon to impose her will on everyone else. Instead, she ended up uniting the neighborhood against her overreach and exposing her own corruption. On cold winter mornings, I still enjoy the ritual of loading wood into my furnace. I watch the smoke rise briefly before the fire settles into a clean, hot burn. I think about how close I came to giving in, to just removing the furnace to avoid conflict. I am grateful I did not. The neighborhood is quieter now, more peaceful. People still use their outdoor furnaces, and no one complains about smoke or aesthetics. We look out for each other, share resources, and maintain our properties with pride. It is what a real community should be, not the artificial construct that Barbara tried to create through fear and control. Sometimes I see Richard Patterson around town. He nods politely but keeps his distance. His law firm dropped the HOA as a client after Barbara's arrest, probably to avoid the appearance of impropriety. The whole scandal tainted his reputation, even though he was not directly involved in her crimes. Mrs. Henderson moved away about a year after everything went down. I heard she could not handle the shame of having been so closely associated with Barbara. The Chens apologized to me for having complained about my furnace in the first place, admitting that Barbara had pressured them into it. I accepted their apology without hesitation. They were victims of her manipulation just like everyone else. Tom remains a good friend. His outdoor furnace sits next to his garage, quietly doing its job every winter. We often joke about the Great Furnace War of 2026, though it was not really funny at the time. The legal fees I incurred during the fight were partially reimbursed by the HOA once the new board took over and reviewed what had happened. They recognized that I had been fighting for a principle that benefited everyone, not just myself. It did not cover everything, but it helped. Looking back now, several years later, I can see how that conflict was a turning point for our community. Barbara's attempt to ban my outdoor furnace was never really about smoke or aesthetics. It was about power and control. She could not tolerate anyone doing anything without her approval, and when I challenged her authority, she escalated until she destroyed herself. The energy crisis of 2026 exposed the folly of her position. When people were facing bills of $800 or $900 a month to heat their homes, suddenly the supposed nuisance of a little wood smoke did not seem like such a big deal. Economic reality trumped aesthetic preferences, as it usually does. But the most important outcome was not about furnaces or heating bills. It was about the community learning to stand up against unreasonable authority, to question decisions that did not make sense, and to come together when it mattered. Barbara ran the HOA like a fiefdom for years because no one challenged her. Once people started pushing back, her whole house of cards collapsed. The outdoor furnace still sits in my backyard, a silent monument to that battle. It has paid for itself many times over in heating cost savings. More importantly, it represents something larger, the principle that homeowners have rights, that HOAs exist to serve the community rather than control it, and that standing up for what is right is worth the struggle. Winter mornings in Ohio can be brutal, with temperatures well below zero and wind that cuts through multiple layers of clothing. But inside my home, warmed by wood I cut and split myself, I am comfortable and secure. I do not worry about energy prices or supply disruptions. I have taken control of my own comfort and independence. The neighborhood has changed in other ways too. The new HOA leadership focused on things that actually matter, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, handling legitimate disputes between neighbors. They adopted a philosophy of minimal interference with individual property rights, unless there is a clear and compelling reason to intervene. It is how HOAs should operate, but too often do not. I still get calls occasionally from people in other subdivisions who are fighting similar battles with their HOAs. News of our case spread through HOA reform circles, and Judge Walsh's ruling became cited precedent in Ohio. I share my experience and offer encouragement. Sometimes you have to fight, and sometimes fighting leads to unexpected victories. The wood I burn comes from sustainable sources, mostly dead trees and storm damage from local properties. I take satisfaction in the fact that I am using a renewable resource, keeping money in the local economy, and reducing my dependence on fossil fuels. These were not my primary motivations when I installed the furnace, but they are nice side benefits. Barbara served 2 years of her 4-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard she moved to Florida to live with a sister, far away from the community she had tried to dominate. Good riddance, frankly. Some people never learn that you cannot build yourself up by tearing others down. The restitution she was ordered to pay came in monthly installments, garnished from whatever work she could find. The HOA will probably never recover the full amount, but at least there was some accountability. The new board used insurance proceeds to cover most of the shortfall, and they implemented proper financial oversight to prevent future theft. I think about what might have happened if I had simply given in when Barbara first knocked on my door that November morning years ago. I would have torn out a perfectly good heating system, probably at significant expense. I would have been dependent on natural gas or propane when prices skyrocketed. I would have spent thousands of extra dollars on heating bills over the subsequent winters, and I would have set a precedent that the HOA could arbitrarily ban anything they wanted, no matter how unreasonable. Instead, I fought back. It was not easy and it was not cheap, but it was the right thing to do. The victory was not just personal. It benefited the entire community by establishing limits on HOA overreach and exposing corruption that might have continued for years. The outdoor furnace community in Meadowbrook Heights now includes more than 30 homes. We have an informal network where we share information about wood sources, maintenance tips, and efficiency improvements. Some people burn primarily ash, others prefer oak or hickory. Everyone has their own system and preferences, but we all share a common appreciation for the independence and cost savings that outdoor wood heat provides. The energy markets eventually stabilized, though prices never returned to the low levels of 2024 and earlier. The crisis of 2026 was a wake-up call for many people about the vulnerability of depending entirely on conventional utilities. Solar installations increased, geothermal systems became more popular, and yes, outdoor wood furnaces proliferated throughout rural and suburban Ohio. Barbara's legacy in Meadowbrook Heights is complicated. On one hand, she did embezzle money and abuse her authority. On the other hand, her overreach inadvertently sparked a community awakening that made us stronger and more united. Sometimes good things emerge from bad situations, though I would rather it had happened without all the conflict and criminality. I still heat my home with wood every winter. The routine has become meditative, selecting the right wood, splitting it to the proper size, loading the furnace, adjusting the air intake for optimal burn. There is something deeply satisfying about providing for your own needs through physical work and planning ahead. My heating costs remain a fraction of what my neighbors pay, even those who have relatively efficient gas systems. The money I save goes toward other things: home improvements, savings, occasional travel. It adds up significantly over time. The lawsuit and the subsequent criminal case created a body of legal precedent that has helped other homeowners in Ohio fight similar HOA battles. Marcus Donovan, my attorney, occasionally gives presentations at property rights conferences, using my case as an example of successful resistance to HOA overreach. I attended one of his presentations once, and it was strange hearing my own story told from a legal perspective. The friendship networks that formed during the conflict have persisted. People who stood together against Barbara's ultimatums have remained close. We help each other with various projects, socialize regularly, and maintain the kind of genuine community bonds that HOAs claim to foster but often actually undermine. I've expanded my wood processing capacity over the years, investing in better equipment and developing more efficient techniques. I can now process several cords of wood in a weekend, which gives me inventory to share with neighbors who need it. I do not sell it commercially, but I help people out when they need wood, just as they help me with other things. The outdoor furnace itself has required minimal maintenance, an annual cleaning, occasional replacement of gaskets and fire bricks, and that is about it. The return on investment has been extraordinary, probably the best of any home improvement I have ever made. Looking at the bigger picture, the whole saga taught me important lessons about governance, community, and individual rights. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose when they stick to reasonable regulations and genuine community needs, but they become destructive when they are captured by people like Barbara, who use them for personal power trips or worse, criminal enterprises. Homeowners need to stay engaged and hold their HOA boards accountable. Attend meetings, ask questions, demand transparency. When something does not seem right, investigate. Do not just assume that board members have everyone's best interests at heart. As we learned with Barbara, sometimes they are just in it for themselves. The energy crisis also taught lessons about resilience and preparedness. Depending entirely on systems you do not control makes you vulnerable to price spikes, supply disruptions, and market manipulation. Diversifying your energy sources and maintaining some level of independence provides security and peace of mind. I have thought about writing up the whole experience as a cautionary tale for other homeowners, maybe even a book. The story has all the elements: conflict, betrayal, redemption, justice. But mostly I just want to move forward and enjoy the life I have built, free from the drama and stress of those contentious years. The outdoor furnace sits in my backyard, doing its job quietly and efficiently. On the coldest winter days, when I see my neighbors' gas meters spinning frantically and hear them complaining about their heating bills, I feel a quiet satisfaction. Not because they are suffering, but because I made a choice that insulated me from that suffering, and because I stood my ground when it would have been easier to cave. Barbara tried to use fear and intimidation to force me into compliance. She weaponized the HOA, leveraged her husband's legal credentials, and attempted to marshal community sentiment against me. She failed because I refused to be bullied, and because I had the resources and determination to fight back. The criminal charges and conviction were not my doing. I did not investigate her finances or report her to authorities, but I am not sorry she got caught. People who abuse positions of trust deserve to face consequences. The fact that she was stealing from the community while simultaneously trying to micromanage everyone's lives just added extra irony to her downfall. These days, when I load wood into my furnace on cold winter mornings, I sometimes think about that first confrontation with Barbara. If I could go back in time and change anything, I do not think I would. The path was difficult, but it led to a good outcome for me and for the community. Sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The neighborhood is peaceful now. The new HOA board operates with transparency and restraint. People heat their homes however they choose, within reasonable bounds. Property values have remained stable, despite Barbara's dire predictions that outdoor furnaces would destroy the market. Life goes on, better than before in many ways. I remain grateful for the lawyers, neighbors, and friends who supported me during the conflict. Marcus Donovan earned every penny of his fees with his skilled advocacy. Tom and others who stood up at that contentious HOA meeting showed real courage in defying Barbara's intimidation. Judge Walsh applied the law fairly and reached the right conclusion. All of these people played important roles in the positive outcome. The outdoor wood furnace is more than just a heating appliance to me now. It is a symbol of self-sufficiency, of standing up for your rights, of refusing to be pushed around by petty tyrants. Every time I walk past it, I remember what it took to defend my right to have it, and I feel proud that I did not back down. Winter will come again, as it always does in Ohio. The temperatures will drop, the snow will fall, and people will fire up their heating systems. I will load my outdoor furnace with seasoned oak and ash, and my home will be warm and comfortable. My heating bills will be minimal while others spend hundreds or thousands of dollars. And I will know that I earned this independence through my willingness to fight for it when it mattered most. The great outdoor furnace war of 2026 is now part of Meadowbrook Heights history. It is a story people tell new residents, a cautionary tale about HOA overreach, and a hopeful story about community members standing together against abuse of authority. I am proud to have been at the center of it, even though I never sought that role. Barbara Patterson is gone, serving her time and living with the consequences of her crimes. The HOA she once dominated has been reformed and operates better than ever. The community she tried to control has come together in ways she never imagined, united by shared challenges and mutual support. And my outdoor wood furnace keeps burning, season after season, a testament to the value of standing your ground and the rewards of self-sufficiency. It was worth every bit of the struggle, and I would do it all over again if I had to. Some battles are worth fighting, and this was definitely one of them.